Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'm so thrilled you're joining us today because honestly, the topic we're tackling feels incredibly relevant to our lives right now, even though the text we're analyzing is literally thousands of years old. Today, we're diving straight into 1 Timothy chapter 6, specifically verses 4 through 10. Look, we live in a world that is just completely dominated by hustle culture. You know the vibe. Maximizing profit and constantly upgrading your lifestyle is practically the default setting for everyone. But this ancient text, it offers a radical, completely opposite perspective on what it actually means to be wealthy. So let's just jump right in.
So can spirituality actually be a tool for financial gain? It's a pretty provocative thought, isn't it? We actually see these two realms, the spiritual and the financial, intersecting in some really strange ways today. But the text we're exploring doesn't just casually ask this question, it confronts it head-on. It sets up this absolutely fascinating paradox about true wealth. And as we go through this explainer together, we're going to see exactly how this ancient author completely dismantled the idea that your faith should somehow be a vehicle for your bank account.
Part 1. The false equation, using faith for profit.
To really grasp the true nature of wealth, we first have to understand the core problem the text addresses in verses 4 and 5. The author outlines a massive fundamental misconception here, describing individuals who have just entirely missed the point. It says they're conceited and understand nothing. And the thing is, when someone misunderstands the entire purpose of their faith, it doesn't just stay a private internal issue, it bleeds right out into their community. The text explicitly links this misunderstanding to an unhealthy interest in controversies, quarrels about words, envy, strife, malicious talk, and constant friction. It's describing a completely toxic environment. And why does all this friction exist in the first place? Well, it all points back to one core corrupt motive.
And here is that motive, right from verse 5. It's individuals who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. This right here is the ultimate error being called out. It is the literal commodification of faith. The text is fiercely criticizing people who look at godliness, which is supposed to be all about moral and spiritual integrity, and treat it instead like it's just a business strategy. They've been robbed of the truth, as the text puts it, because they're viewing their spirituality entirely through a lens of profitability.
Section 2. The True Great Gain, Redefining Wealth.
Okay, so if financial profit isn't the goal, then what on earth is? In verse 6, the text takes that toxic mindset and flips it completely on its head. Instead of godliness is a means to financial gain, it offers us this brilliant new formula. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the addition of that one crucial word, contentment. The text isn't saying that gain is bad, not at all. It's actually redefining what great gain is. True wealth isn't just your spiritual practice plus a bunch of money, it's your spiritual practice plus being entirely, completely satisfied with what you already have.
Section 3. Life's Ultimate Reality Check, the Mortality Clause.
The author clearly understands human nature. It's super easy to say, just be content, but it's a whole lot harder to actually do it, right? So verse 7 grounds this lofty philosophical idea in stark biological reality, the totally temporal nature of wealth. Just think about the timeline of our lives. Step 1, birth. As the text says, we brought nothing into the world. And step 2, death. We can take nothing out of it. This is the ultimate biological reality check. You literally cannot pack a U-Haul behind a hearse. By reminding the reader of the absolute physical boundaries of human life, the text proves that financial wealth is strictly temporary. It is entirely locked within the bracket of your lifetime. So tying your ultimate happiness to something you literally cannot keep is, well, it's fundamentally illogical.
So, if we can't take anything with us anyway, what's the standard for being satisfied while we're actually here? Verse 8 establishes what we can call baseline contentment. The text says, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Guys, that is an incredibly minimalist ancient standard. It completely strips away all of our modern excesses. It's arguing that once your basic fundamental human needs for sustenance and shelter are met, everything else is just extra.
Now, why does establishing this specific baseline matter so much? Because as our analysis highlights, contentment and the prudent management of your resources are ultimately about maintaining your personal freedom. When you aren't constantly striving for more than just food and clothing, you free yourself from that exhausting treadmill of endless desire. You're no longer enslaved by the absolute need to accumulate more stuff. You remain completely free.
Section 4. The Trap of Accumulation, the Danger of Desire.
But what happens if you just ignore this baseline? Well, verse 9 maps out this tragic, almost mechanical downward spiral. It starts off simply enough in step 1, those who want to get rich. It's just a desire, right? But that desire inevitably leads right to step 2. You fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires, which finally, inevitably, culminates in step 3. These desires plunge people into ruin and destruction. The text is warning us that the mere ambition for riches functions as a highly dangerous snare. It's not some passive desire, it is an active trap that pulls you under.
Section 5. The root of all evil. The final warning.
Verse 10 contains one of the most famous and, honestly, one of the most frequently misquoted warnings in all of ancient literature. But before we get into it, ask yourself this. What really happens when money becomes the absolute ultimate goal of a human life? When it completely overrides your contentment, your morality, and your spiritual integrity? The text provides a really sobering answer.
For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Now, the absolutely crucial point to catch here is the word love. Notice that the text does not say money itself is evil. Money is just an inanimate object. It's a tool, nothing more. It is the love of money, that deep, overriding affection, and the prioritization of financial gain above absolutely everything else that acts as the toxic root from which all sorts of destructive behaviors just grow.
And the text concludes by laying out the tragic, real-world consequences for those who actually fall into this trap. It says that some people, because they were so eager for money, have wandered from the faith. They completely lost their spiritual grounding. But this final phrase is what's incredibly striking. It says they have pierced themselves with many griefs. Wow, that is heavy, poetic language. It's telling us that the pain of prioritizing wealth is ultimately self-inflicted. By chasing endlessly after money, they've essentially weaponized their own desires against themselves.
Which brings us to our final thought today. I really want you to ask yourself, are you pursuing true, great gain or just a temporary illusion of wealth? We've seen today through this brilliant ancient text that combining godliness with contentment is the actual formula for a rich life. Striving endlessly for financial gain, it's just a trap that ends in self-inflicted grief. So, as you go back out into a world that is totally obsessed with the hustle, remember the baseline. Remember that true freedom comes from contentment. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you with a whole lot to think about.